Welcome to Carvin Software's instructional videos of Staffing Complete. This video will provide a general overview of the Payroll module in Staffing Complete. Start by navigating to the Payroll module. The Payroll module is used to create work orders, enter in personnel time, process payroll, print checks, and void checks if applicable. It is also referenced when creating invoices based off of the hours and rates entered into this module. Work orders can be created one by one with hours entered in manually or by importing timesheets from a third-party vendor. Payroll is then processed to produce paychecks for the personnel in that specific work order. Carvin Software has software user settings that must be set up prior to utilizing the Payroll module. Make sure that each user has the appropriate settings needed based on the checks and balances that your company has in place. There are 5 tabs in the Payroll module: the Find It tab, the Orders tab, Payroll Batch, Global Process, and Import Time. The first tab that you will encounter is the Find It tab. The Find It tab is where you search for a specific work order, payroll batch, or personnel based on different criteria entered into the software. There are 3 different search options on the Find It tab. An orders search allows the user to search for an order based on the office and order status. The search type will determine what criteria the software will queue off of. There are 8 search types to choose from: the recent orders, date range, customer name, personnel, check number, invoice number, order number, and unbilled hours. Depending on which search type is selected, additional fields will appear to narrow down search results. The recent orders search type is the most frequently used search by software users. A recent order search results will display by order number. A payroll batch search allows the user to search for a payroll batch based on office and order status. The search type will determine what criteria the software will queue off of. Like the order search, there are 8 search types to choose from: recent batches, date range, customer name, personnel, check number, invoice number, batch number, and unbilled hours. Depending on which search type is selected, additional fields will appear to narrow down search results. The recent batches search and batch number search are the 2 search types most frequently used to search for a payroll batch by software users. Search results will display by payroll batch number. The last search type is the payroll history search. A payroll history search is typically used when you're looking for a specific personnel's payroll history. The search type will determine what criteria the software will queue off of. Like the order search, there are 8 search types to choose from: recent payroll, date range, customer name, personnel, check number, invoice number, batch number, and posting number. Depending on which search type is selected, additional fields will appear to narrow down search results. Search results will display by personnel name. The Orders tab is where you first insert an order, which is the first step in the manual order creation process. These orders are tied to a specific customer and office and house the personnel with their hours and rates, the details of which can be printed out. You can also repeat orders and make orders reoccurring. Repeating orders is an easy way to have an order that will mostly be remaining the same be repeated rather than having to create the order again. Reoccurring orders have the same functionality as repeated orders. The difference being, reoccurring orders is done automatically once the order is in completed status versus the repeat function, which is done manually. We see the Orders tab utilized most to process payroll that has a short turnaround. The orders are created that morning, personnel are sent to the job sites, hours are returned, and checks are processed the same day. There are 10 sub-tabs on the Orders tab. The Step 1 Enter Hours tab, Step 2 Process Payroll tab, the Payroll History tab, Service tab, Notes tab, Directions tab, Transportation tab, Checklist tab, Documents tab, and finally, the Message tab. Within the Step 1 Enter Hours tab, you can assign positions, enter hours, and review the total wages and billing for the order selected. Once personnel are added with the correct position, you can make changes to the bill and pay rates, add any one-time additions or deductions, add other billable services such as background checks, drug tests, or mileage, manage the dates worked by the personnel, and ensure the pay type being used is correct. The second tab is the Step 2 Process Payroll tab. The Step 2 Process Payroll tab is where payroll is processed for entries that have pay hours and rates entered or an addition given. This software calculates various taxes and deductions based on factors on the personnel's profile, such as filing status, reoccurring level deductions, and/or garnishments. From this tab, you can view gross wages and the check type set for each person. Additionally, you can verify if you only want to process certain items that can be selected from the Only Process drop-down box. This tab is where you select the printer, configure the check date, set the week start and end dates, and print the checks. Once payments are printed, a check number will be assigned to that transaction. Whenever possible, multiple time entries for the same personnel will be combined into one single check unless specified during processing by the software user. If you've set up the software to utilize the Orders Checklist feature, the checklist item will need to be marked completed before checks can be processed here. The next tab is the Payroll History tab. The Payroll History tab shows all the payroll printed or voided for that given order number. You can review what deductions were taken out of checks by selecting the personnel. You can process a void here if the week hasn't been closed. If there is a number displayed in the posting column, this would indicate that a historical void would need to be completed. The next tab is the Service tab. The Service tab is for items that are meant to be billed to the customer, are typically in relation to the order, but is separate from the bill hours of the order as it will generate its own invoice. The fifth tab is the Notes tab. The Notes tab is a general note-taking portion where a user can detail information specific to the order and can be viewed by anyone that has access to the Payroll module. The next tab is the Directions tab. The Directions tab is a general text area where you can easily write out specific directions related to the order. These directions will then be printed out with the order. The seventh tab is the Transportation tab. The Transportation tab is available on orders as an easy way to check at a glance if your additions and deductions for transportation type entries match. These are added as specific additions and deductions on the Step 1 Enter Hours tab, where the pay type is specific to transportation. From this tab, you can review these entries and ensure you are balanced. The next tab is the Checklist tab. The Checklist tab at the order level requires that all items on the list be marked as completed before payments can be processed. Otherwise, the user will be prompted with a message that the order level checklist item hasn't been completed. Once marked completed, the software will log who completed it and when. This is useful for any items that must be done before payroll is processed, such as reviewing overtime hours or verifying the office on the order. The next tab is the Documents tab. The Documents tab allows the user to upload documents specific to this order. These documents can also be referenced when emailing out invoices with the option to include documents. Though you may select any document type, a JPEG or PDF, the order's type must be selected to be referenced with invoice emailing. You can set the default document type as orders if desired in the Setup module. The last tab is the Message tab. The Message tab will display text messages sent. These texts will allow users that have text messaging to communicate with personnel via text. The next tab is the Payroll Batch tab. The Payroll Batch tab is where you can attach and modify a range of personnel from various positions, job sites, and customers, all on the same screen for reviewing and mass processing. These entries can be existing orders or new entries that are added directly to the batch. New entries will force the software to automatically create an order for those entries. Utilizing the Payroll Batch tab works best when wanting to process payroll for multiple orders at once, rather than having to enter hours order by order. Whenever possible, multiple time entries for the same personnel will be combined into one single check unless specified during processing by the software user. The Payroll Batch tab works well for adding placements quickly, building a large payroll batch of personnel and hours. We see that most of our clients that utilize the import time typically choose to process payroll in the Payroll Batch tab versus utilizing the Orders tab. When a client has a bi-weekly, semi-monthly, or monthly payroll schedule, they will typically group all open orders on a payroll batch and process payroll through the Payroll Batch tab. This cuts down on processing time. The user doesn't have to switch between all of the different orders, and it will combine multiple entries over work order batches into one single check for the personnel, cutting overhead cost in check paper and Micker toner. There are 3 sub-tabs on the Payroll Batch tab. The first tab is the Step 1 Enter Hours tab. Next is the Step 2 Process Payroll. And the last tab is the Payroll History tab. Within the Step 1 Enter Hours tab, you can assign positions, enter hours, and review the total wages and billing for the payroll batch, and attach records from previous orders that have been created. Once personnel are added with the correct position, you can make changes to the bill and pay rates, add any one-time additions or deductions, other billable services such as background checks, drug tests, or mileage, manage the dates worked by the personnel, and ensure the pay type being used is correct. If you are utilizing Bullhorn for front-end placements, you will sync those placements in the Payroll Batch through this tab. The next tab is the Step 2 Process Payroll tab. This tab is where payroll is processed for entries that have pay hours and rates or additions given. The software calculates various taxes and deductions based on factors on the personnel's profile, such as filing status and reoccurring level deductions. From this tab, you can view gross wages and the check type set for each person. Additionally, you can verify if you only want to process certain items that can be selected from the Only Process drop-down box. This is where you select your printer, configure the check date, configure the week start and end dates, and process the checks. Once payments are printed, a check number will be assigned to that transaction. Whenever possible, multiple time entries for the same personnel will be combined into one single check unless specified during processing by the software user. If you've set up the software to utilize the Orders Checklist feature, the Orders Checklist items will need to be marked completed for every order contained on the Payroll Batch before checks can be processed here. The last tab is the Payroll History tab. The Payroll History tab is the same as the Payroll History tab in the Orders tab. It shows all the payroll that are printed or voided for that given batch number. You can review what deductions were taken out of checks cut by selecting the personnel. You can process a void here if the week hasn't been closed. If there is a number displayed in the posting column, this would indicate that a historical void would need to be completed. The Global Process tab allows a higher level of processing orders and batches and allows you to process multiple payroll batches at once. On the Global Processing tab, you can view multiple personnel on multiple batches, have the ability to process payroll for all or one specific office, as well as process based on check type. This is a great way to view things at a higher level than payroll batches, as well as process virtually all payroll across all offices at once. If any errors for a given personnel are found on the Global Process tab, the errors will need to be changed on the payroll batch, which is noted in the grid. We see this tab most frequently used when payroll processing is centralized or when one staff member must complete the final approval before checks can be printed. For example, if a client has multiple branch locations where placements are occurring, the branch locations create the orders and send the personnel to their job site. When time is returned to either the individual branches or the centralized payroll processing office, hours are entered either on the Orders tab or the Payroll Batch is created on the Payroll Batch tab, grouping all open orders together. After all hours are entered, the designated manager or corporate staff can utilize the Global Processing tab to view all open batches based on the search criteria entered to review and print checks. The last tab in the Payroll module is the Import Time tab. This tab is where you import captured time entries from various time clocks to mass enter payroll information. The Import Time tab allows you to utilize third-party time clocks for information, such as personnel working for which customers, positions, and hours, versus having to enter in that information manually into a work order or a payroll batch. Timesheet data that is imported into Carven software must be in a specific format. For more information regarding the import specifications, review the Time Clock Import Specifications document on our wiki. There are 4 sub-tabs that are used to review the timesheet data that has been imported and review any errors for that specific data. For more information regarding the Payroll module, please visit our wiki at the address linked on the screen.